to yield the pulpit to the illustrious pastor of this church, Dumas A. Harshaw, who will give us a brief sketch of the history of the First Baptist Church here at South Wilmington. After Pastor Dumas has spoken, the next voice you will hear will be that of Deacon Randolph Bazemore, who will, Randolph Bazemore, yes sir, who will provide us with special music. After that, I will come back and introduce our speaker for tonight.
Good evening. Good evening. And welcome to First Baptist Church, 101 South Wilmington Street. We're delighted to have you in our worship experience and in our worship house, and glad to be a part of this wonderful celebration as we lift up the importance of Baptist history and heritage. And so I want to thank Reverend Bonnie Oliver Brandon, first of all, for getting my first name correct and getting Deacon Bazemore's last name correct. But we're certainly glad to be here. I know I have 15 minutes, and so I won't preach a sermon or take a text right now. Yeah, all right? Yeah. But we'll share with you a brief history of First Baptist Church, Wilmington Street, that will be included. Excerpts will be, I will share, but it will be included in a larger form in our souvenir booklet that should be finished by the end of this month. I want to thank the Executive Director, Bruce T. Gorley, for including us and for coming here and allowing us to participate in this rich history on our 200th anniversary. We started some years ago celebrating. This year has been a highlight in terms of First Baptist Church, Wilmington Street, but also Salisbury. And good to see Chris Chapman here. And we've had a rich fellowship, and it's been wonderful sharing together this glorious history of First Baptist Church. Very unique in what God has done here in Raleigh, North Carolina. And so we are blessed to be a part of it and glad that you were here. Deuteronomy 8:18 says, "But thou shalt remember the Lord thy God, for it is he that giveth thee power to get wealth, that he may establish his covenant, which he swore unto thy fathers, as it is this day." This scripture begins our focus on our history as First Baptist Church and established covenant with God. When those handful of persons met at the state capitol building in 1812, they were not Jews who could trace their lineage back to the early days of Judea, Palestine, and Samaria, but they were apparently some Bible-reading, Bible-hearing, God-fearing individuals who trusted that the Almighty God they served was giving them the courage, faith, and wisdom to establish a place of worship where men and women and children of any ethnicity would one day pray, praise, and serve him. First Baptist Church began as a biracial church on March 7th, 1812. 23 members organized a church in Raleigh, North Carolina. 9 of the founding members were white and 14 were black. Of the 9 white organizing members, 5 were female and 4 were male. The church membership remained biracial from 1812 to 1868, a span of 56 years. Diagonally across Capitol Square at the southwest corner of the intersection of Salisbury with the Hillsborough Streets stands her counterpart, the other half of the organized church of 1812, whose celebration likewise is now in progress. Behold a spectacle, the like of which no doubt no other community in our national life can boast. 2 sentinels and guardians of Christian democracy standing watch over the welfare of the state, biracial in origin, continuous in goodwill and brotherly kindness, in separation, climactic in the observance of its nativity. The geography of the two churches has not changed. Their mission, however, greatly enlarged over 199 years of existence. When we think of the number of national disasters within the 200 years, we are reminded that only God, the Creator, could keep the edifice and those who worship within over such a great expanse of time. Our continued existence echoes the first mention of the church as found in the Holy Scriptures. Christ speaking to Peter, his disciple, was quoted, "Upon this rock I will build my church, and the gates of Hades shall not prevail against it. And I will give unto thee the keys of heaven, and whatsoever thou shalt bind on earth shall be bound in heaven, and whatsoever thou shalt loose on earth shall be loosed in heaven." St. Matthew 1:18 and 19. Standing firmly on the promises of God found in His holy word, men of leadership, scholarship, and faith have stood in First Baptist pulpit to lead her and guide her safely and spiritually sound into the 21st century. Throughout her 200 years history, only 10 men have been called of God to lead this flock in its modern era. That also testifies to God's established covenant with this church family. The cornerstone of this historic church correctly bears the inscription 1812. It was through the dynamic leadership of Elder Robert T. Daniel that the First Baptist Church was organized as a state house, now the Capitol. Elder Robert T. Daniel was the first pastor of the newly organized church and served until 1815. At that time, the Negro membership had increased from 14 to 25. From 1815 to 1821, the Reverends Josiah Crudup, Thomas Croker, and James Woodbury served respectfully. In 1816, the members erected a church on Person Street between Hargett and Martin Streets at a cost of approximately $700. In 1822, the Reverend Daniel again became pastor and served until 1826. It was also in 1822 that the church was moved to Moore Square, which thereafter was known as Baptist Grove. By 1823, the membership had increased to 156 Negroes and 70 whites. From 1827 to 1832, Reverend P.W. Dowd, who became the first president of the Baptist State Convention, served as pastor. He was succeeded by Reverend William Hill Jordan, who pastored until 1839. The Reverend Amos J. Battle was minister from 1839 to 1844. It was under his guidance that the deed for the lot on the corner of Wilmington and Morgan Streets was secured, and a house of worship was constructed at a cost of $6,000. In 1856, the Reverend Thomas E. Skinner was chosen as pastor. During his first years, the membership increased by 80 persons. Under his leadership, the church purchased a lot on the corner of Salisbury and Edenton Streets. The cost was $6,000, and their present church edifice was erected. Dr. Skinner, writing in his book entitled Sermon and Remembrances, states that the site could have not been secured but for the aid of Jim Atkins, a devout Negro member, blacksmith by trade, and rent collector for Dr. Cook, who was the owner of the Salisbury Street property. He mentions Robert Shepard as Jim Atkins' equal in strength of Christian character. Reverend Thomas H. Pritchard was the pastor from 1868 to 1874. He later became president of Wake Forest College. During his pastorate, Henry Jett and approximately 200 Negroes asked for and were granted permission on June 5, 1868, to move their membership. the first pastor of the First Baptist Church after the separation from the biracial church with the Reverend William Warwick of Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. He has been described as an unusually strong pastor, very well educated, refined, spiritual, resourceful, practical, and logical in his interpretation of the scriptures and the general problems of life. He served from 1867 to 1874. The Reverend J.J. World served as a pastor from 1874 to 1880. He was called to serve a second term from 1886 to 1902. Born in Harnett County near Wilmington, North Carolina, he went to Detroit, Michigan as a child, attended school there, and learned a trade. He later moved to Toledo, Ohio, where he married and also pastored a church prior to returning to North Carolina. Before coming to the First Baptist Church in Raleigh, he pastored a church in Tarboro, North Carolina. The Reverend William A. Green was the third pastor who was a Negro. He pastored between the two terms of Reverend J.J. World's. He was born in one of the provinces of Canada, Nova Scotia. His early education was received in Boston, Massachusetts. His higher education was completed at Howard University in Washington, D.C. He enlisted in the Union Army as a chaplain at the outbreak of the Civil War. He taught the men of his regiment to read, spell, and write. He was called to the pastor of the First Baptist Church in Raleigh, North Carolina in 1880 and served faithfully until his death in 1886. He was buried in the National Cemetery in Wilmington, North Carolina. Dr. J.W. Kirby, a native Virginian, was called to pastor in 1902 following the Reverend J.J. World's second pastoral term. His pastorate was brief, but he received distinction as an instructor in the theological department of Shaw University. He died after only 8 months as pastor. Following his demise, Reverend World continued to serve until the end of 1902. The fifth pastor of First Baptist Church was Reverend William T. Coleman. His important contribution was the church's present structure. It was during his pastorate that the cornerstone was laid. Dr. Coleman instituted the dividing of the church membership into clubs. We now call them groups. The names of these clubs in his day appears in the stained glass windows of the sanctuary. Today, First Baptist Church has an adult male Sunday school class named in his memory. The sixth pastor, Reverend C.E. Askew, served from 1912 to 1921. In 1908, Reverend Askew graduated from Shaw University. He showed his fiscal leadership abilities by liquidating the church's debt in a small time. The organ purchased during his pastorate lasted until the pastorate of Reverend Dr. Charles W. Ward, Sr. The seventh pastor of First Baptist Church at 101 South Wilmington Street was the Reverend Dr. Oscar Sidney Bullock. In 1921, the High Point, North Carolina native was called to lead the church. His pioneering idea for transportation inspired the church to purchase a bus for free transportation for children and adults in 1925. His leadership caused the third floor annex to be erected in 1933 at a cost of $20,000. His vision made the greatest Sunday school program a reality at the church's present location. The church also purchased 2 parsonages, one on Davie Street for $9,000 and later a second on Bloodworth Street for $7,000. Dr. Bullock's organizing and administrative genius made First Baptist Church an institution to which men and women came from many sections of our state and country to observe a model Sunday school and a church functioning to the glory of God and the edification of all of its constituency. In July 1959, Reverend Charles W. Ward became the 8th Negro pastor of the First Baptist Church, A native of LaGrange, Georgia, he graduated from the Depot High School of that city. He received a Bachelor of Arts degree from Morehouse College in Atlanta and a Bachelor of Divinity degree from Howard University in Washington, D.C. Prior to his service at First Baptist, Reverend Ward was pastor of the First Baptist Church of Macon, Georgia from 1954 to 1959. Dr. Ward's leadership skills enabled him to be a distinctive community personality as well as a leader in state and national organizations. He was a member of the Mayor's Committee, president of the Raleigh Ministerial Association, an executive board member of the Lot Carey Convention, assistant secretary of the General Baptist State Convention of North Carolina, a member of the Foreign Mission Board of the National Baptist Convention, and chairman of the executive board of the Raleigh-Wake branch of the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People. On his watch, repairs were made to the church steeple, the entrance to the balcony, a new heating system was installed, a new roof was placed on the Bullock building, and the basement beneath the sanctuary was completely renewed and refurnished. The art-filled stained glass windows were re-leaded, renovated, and storm windows installed. A new copper roof was installed over the sanctuary, and a new motor pipe organ was installed. The interior of the sanctuary was also restyled and renovated during Dr. Ward's pastorate. A new Frigidaire freezer locker was installed in the kitchen, and a new piano was purchased and installed in the sanctuary. A Sunday school bus was also purchased at the cost of approximately $310,000. In addition to the physical renovations, there were additions of souls claimed for Christ. 800 new members joined First Baptist Church during Dr. Ward's pastorate. After the death of Dr. Ward and Charles W. Ward in 1988, Reverend Nathaniel Oliver Boykin was called from the congregation to be the interim pastor and later the 9th pastor of First Baptist Church on Wilmington Street. He was educated at Central Piedmont Community College, Nyack Missionary College, Shaw University, North Carolina Central University, Shaw Divinity School, and the Southeastern Theological Seminary. Under the pastorate of Reverend Boykin, the church was given a 5-year plan in which the church worked to improve the financial status by 20%, the renovation of the heating and air conditioning system in the sanctuary and the basement of the church at a cost of $202,000. The church was computerized with the funding coming from the Sunday school. Pew cushions for the sanctuary were also purchased during this time. Reverend Boykin reviewed and reassessed the need for the Christian Education Board to implement new programs to meet the needs of a diverse congregation, such as the 50-plus club for senior citizens, the adults coming together spiritually for young adults ages 25 through 40. The homeless ministry began with the help of Mrs. Louise Shaw and Levi Beckwith. Reverend Boykin updated the curriculum to meet the current challenges of the decades of the 80s and the 90s. With the help of the late Reverend Dr. Robert Powell, First Baptist was able to establish housing for female offenders in Wake County, as well as to establish the annual Christmas dinner at the North Carolina Correctional Institute for Women. Prior to the call of Dr. Dumas Alexander Harshaw Jr., the Reverend Dr. Isaac B. Horton served as the interim pastor. A child of the First Baptist Church, Dr. Horton helped to preach and teach the congregation while the search committee undertook its task of finding a new pastor to lead First Baptist into the 21st century. And at that, I will conclude and apologize for 1 or 2 errors in this document, but that is the history that will be included in a larger form in our souvenir booklet that will be complete at the end of this month. Thank you so much.
Good evening. This selection was recorded a number of years ago by a gospel male group called the Soul Stirrers, when Sam Cooke was a member of that group. The minister was preaching, and the crowd was standing near. The congregation was singing a tune in a voice that was loud and clear. You know, the crowd that stood around him, they were crying, I could plainly see, for the song that they sang was touching. They sang, nearer, nearer, my God, to thee. Oh, nearer, my God, to thee. Oh, nearer, nearer to thee. They kept on singing, nearer, my God, nearer, my God, to thee. Oh, singing nearer and nearer, my God, to thee. Oh, nearer, nearer to thee. They kept on singing, oh, nearer, nearer, my God, to thee. I remember when I was just a little boy, I used to see Mother standing all alone. I used to wonder what my mother was doing. When I saw Mother with folded arms, she was looking up toward the sky. Mother had teardrops falling from her eyes. I could still hear the song that my mother was singing.